Brad, I've been really, really excited to talk tonight. I just finished your book, The Practice of Groundedness, at the beginning of the week, and it was profound for me.
Mm.
Um, so, before I get started with just how the book impacted me and some of the questions I'd love to ask you about it, I just wanted to hear from you, how you think about the book and how you talk about it when you're discussing it with others. It's just kind of the summary.
Yeah. So I like to think of the issue that the book is trying to address, a term that I call heroic individualism. And it is this game of constant one-upsmanship against self and others, where measurable success is the main arbiter of one's value or self-worth. And it is a global keeping up with the Joneses now that we have the internet. And it is this constant pushing for the next thing. There's some research in the book on this topic. I just love how poetically named it is, the arrival fallacy, which
Hmm.
states that so many of us have this notion that if we just do insert that thing, if we just get that promotion, get that car, get that house, then we'll be content, fulfilled, and happy. But what all the modern science shows and all these ancient wisdom traditions show is that it's just that, it's a fallacy, it's an illusion. So you get on this hedonic treadmill of constantly pushing for the next thing. And in today's world, which is so fast paced, the result is this frenetic energy. So lots of people feel unmoored. I know at times I certainly do too. So, what is the opposite of being unmoored? It's feeling grounded, strong, stable, whole where you are. And that began a intellectual journey to try to understand, well, what does it really mean to be grounded, and how might one cultivate this sense of, again, being strong, stable where you are, not to opt out of the world, but to better stand strong amidst all kinds of weather.
I love that. And I think that last imagery is awesome. It speaks to something you talk about in the beginning of the book, where you address, kind of going on a walk or a hike in California with a friend of yours, and how both of y'all were sort of feeling a little bit of that sense of being unmoored or going through a rough patch. And then seeing the redwood trees and noticing that in the canopy there was a lot of movement with the wind, and a lot of sort of reaction to the weather, versus where you were standing on the ground, very little, if any, movement. The trunks of the trees were standing strong, and the stronger they were, or the closer you looked to the ground, the stronger they were. And how this kind of was a light bulb moment of, oh, this is kind of what we're missing, is a focus on the ground and our roots and what keeps us stable when there is so much change. And we hear that all the time. Change is faster. It's happening faster than it ever has in human history. So it's almost like now this idea of groundedness is more important than it's ever been. Um, but it's not talked about that often in today's society. So that was my first question for you. Is when you were thinking about the problem, which you just described beautifully and which you call heroic individualism in the book, and that solution of groundedness. What was the process of identifying this issue and the solution? Did you kind of come at one before the other, or did they organically sort of feed themselves and um, bring each other to light?
So I think it's really, the problem definitely came first.
Okay.
Um, and I would say that the solution came second.
Okay.
Well, of course, if the problem came first. So the problem, part of it is I do not write because I have this stuff figured out. I
Yeah.
write to figure it out. The best
Mhm.
part about being an author is you get paid to figure stuff out that you like are struggling with yourself. So a part of it was my own feeling of this lack of groundedness, this frenetic energy, this constant buzz and pace in my own life, and lots of excitement, but not a lot of ease, and realizing that excitement and ease are actually very different things. Mm-hmm. And I also saw this in my coaching practice, where I work with many individuals who by conventional standards are super successful. So founders of companies that got venture capital funding, Olympians that have won gold, silver medals, executives that have been promoted to the top of large, great organizations. And they too constantly felt like something was missing. There'd be a sense of emptiness if they didn't have the proverbial next thing to shoot for. So I started to think, well, it's a race to nowhere. And if you're constantly needing to strive in order to be content, well, what happens, A, to the texture of that striving? And is it really done from a place of choice, or is it more compulsion because you'll feel empty if you don't do it? And then B, what happens if the striving doesn't go well? What happens if you're not successful? Or if you are successful, then are you going to constantly have to beat yourself as you were the last time? Around the same time, I started paying really close attention to commercials and realizing that regardless of the product, whether it was cat litter, dishwasher detergent, or a fancy car or a sports watch, all the people are always beautiful and they seem to have these perfect lives. Mm-hmm. So the culture very much echoes that sentiment of, oh, if you just buy this cat litter, well, then you too will be beautiful and have this beautiful, gorgeous home and this happy family. But it has nothing to do with cat litter. So like it's in the air that we breathe and in the water that we drink is this notion of if then. Mm-hmm. And I kind of wanted to flip that on its head and be like, well, what if it's just now? Which then started this exploration of what does modern science, again, have to say about really being stable, being grounded? What does ancient wisdom have to say? And then in my reporting, are there people that are actually doing this and practicing it? And in this kind of writing that I'd call really social science, it is a lot harder to get to absolute truths. So in life sciences and biology, you can isolate cells, you can put them in petri dishes, you can watch them change. Social issues are a lot bigger and more amorphous. Mm-hmm. So I'm very fortunate that I'm not an original researcher that has to be very narrow. So my approach to all of these topics is always to say, what does the science say? What does ancient wisdom say? What does practice say? And look for patterns. And if something is a pattern across all three of those areas, particularly if there's like good meta-analyses, lots of data behind it, and it survived the test of time in these ancient wisdom traditions, and when you go talk to people, they're actually doing these things, then those are the types of principles to pay attention to. And that's ultimately how I came to the principles in the book.
That is awesome. That was actually going to be my next question, is how you distilled this concept of groundedness, which is, when you explain it, it's this feeling of contentment versus happiness, right? Like happiness being this kind of ephemeral emotion, contentment being this state and state of being. And it's one in which you are self-actualized, you're feeling fulfilled. It's one in which you can also experience negative emotions, but that doesn't totally erode your sense of self. Mm-hmm. And so I was wondering, with a concept that's that far-reaching in terms of it's talking about a sensation that includes your deepest interior, if you believe in souls, like your soul or just self, and then it extends all the way through to your community. So to me, that's a large concept. And you very eloquently broke that into 6 principles, which are accept where you are to get where you want to go, be present so you can own your attention and energy, be patient and you'll get there faster, embrace vulnerability to develop genuine strength and confidence, build deep community, and move your body to ground your mind. And it sounds like those 6 things emerged organically from this research that you're doing, which is really commendable because it's a cross section of not just science, but also philosophy, and looking at where, the two and spiritual traditions, where all three of those really complement and advance each other's ends. So that's really cool.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to say about those principles is they're also the inverse of, I think, what feeds a lot of the problem. So the opposite of acceptance is magical thinking
Right.
or delusion or numbing with buying stuff or tweeting or substances. What does the culture say to do? We've seen this with COVID. There's a lot of delusion in this country about what's happening versus acceptance of a really hard thing, even if you don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
Presence is the opposite of constant distraction, stimulation, and novelty. We
Mm-hmm.
all know that that's everywhere. Patience is the opposite of quote unquote hacks or overnight
Right.
breakthroughs, or of all these stories of really like heroes that aren't actually all that heroic.
Mm-hmm.
Vulnerability, thanks to Brene Brown over the last few years, I think has really become a thing, which is wonderful. I do think amongst men, though, there's still a little bit of like fake toughness. And I think also the pendulum has swung so far that there's a fair amount of performative vulnerability versus
Mm-hmm.
the real thing. And those are two very different things. And
Yeah.
then community, I think, is the most important, because when you think about those redwood trees, what's fascinating about redwoods is their roots, for as big, massive trees as they are, the roots only run 6 to 12 feet deep. So the way that the trees are held to the ground is because the roots are all intertwined with the roots of the neighboring trees.
Mm-hmm.
And humans are very much the same way. We could learn a lot from those redwoods. And in the heroic individual mindset, the goal is to be as efficient as possible and to optimize.
Mm-hmm.
And building community and relationships is not efficient. And if you're really just focused on optimizing your life, every in-person gathering, even before COVID, is going to turn into a phone call. Every phone call is going to turn into a text message. Every text message is going to turn into an email. And in the short term, that might feel great because you're crushing it. Like you're striving for that next thing. But in the long term, you're neglecting what's actually going to fulfill you. And if the weather does turn rough, you need your community to hold you. So I definitely came to the principles by taking this broad survey, but in hindsight, I could have just said like, well, if I really break down heroic individualism and its problems, I'd say it's like delusion, numbing, distraction, speed at all costs, invincibility, performative stuff, and like optimization. And then you ask yourself, what are the opposites? And it turns out to be those principles.
Yeah, I love that. And, I love hearing you say that deep community in some ways feels like the most important, um, because that was the chapter that I read twice.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And because, so this concept of heroic individualism, I think is perfectly named, because in this country, especially, we have such an emphasis on the individual successes, and being, this concept of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, um, and being self-sufficient, which is a total myth. The
Mhm.
more you, you think you're self-sufficient, I think paradoxically, the less you are, the more you're relying on technology that's been developed by however many people, and yada yada, and all of this. Um, and I think in that there's a loss of this emphasis on relationships, and especially relationships that aren't partnerships.
Yep.
So in some ways, I've been thinking the way that this the narrative around partnerships that's dominant in our media, and even just in kind of like transmissions, more like informally, socially, is that the partnership is supposed to be the thing, like that's supposed to
Yeah.
give you everything you need. You also are supposed to give everything to your partner. And because of that, I think when people enter into partnerships in this country, there's a lot of pressure to attenuate those relationships with friends, other family members, to almost like isolate, Um, and that is, I think, I see that as related to heroic individualism. Um, and I also see community as being, like retraining that focus to the community as a really important part of keeping not only individuals healthy, but partnerships as well. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on, um, how on the act of kind of balancing partnerships, self actualization, and these community relationships, and whether you have any thoughts on how people can kind of like push back on this narrative.
Yeah. So I love what you said. Like the first thing I'd say that self-actualization does not happen by oneself.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
like that would be the first thing. So
Right.
maybe it's like you are always situated in a physical space and amongst other people. And if not, then you are isolated, and isolation and loneliness is a real problem, but it's not something to celebrate. And I
Right.
think lots of uber successful people are celebrated. And perhaps part of the reason that they can feel broken inside is because they end up being isolated and lonely. On relationships, in the book, I quote Esther Perel, who's a wonderful family therapist. She's been doing this work for years. And she talks about just what you were alluding to, how in the past, we didn't think of our partner as a Swiss Army knife, meaning they have to do everything, they have to have all these things. Your partner was someone that perhaps you raised a family with, or that you got by financially with, or that was a close friend, or that was your lover, but they didn't have to be all of these things all the time. And today, in so many relationships, that is the expectation. And Esther Perel would say, based on her research and work, that that's not great for the relationship. Going even beyond Esther Perel's time frame in her work of the last 100 years, you think about how our species evolved. And we evolved in these bands and tribes of anywhere between 15 and 150 people. There were never times if a family was isolated or a partnership was isolated out on their own, they would not fare very well. There wouldn't be enough food. They would be prey for predators. So much of what helped our species evolve was the ability to be in, at the time, tribes, now what I'd call community. And I do agree with you that it's so important, because I think some of those other principles are maybe easier to see on their face because no one is telling you, like, disregard your community. If
Right.
anything, we're being offered a lot of substitutes
Right.
for community and being told that they're the real thing. So social media is a big example of that.
Hmm.
And although I'll get to social media in a second, because the research there is very interesting. But
Yeah.
it's this focus, and my guess is many people tuning in can see this sometimes in themselves, is
Hmm.
we can get so rushed or so busy, and it's a part of like this frantic energy, and then we neglect the time to build the community. Because building community, as I said, it's inefficient.
Hmm.
Like you don't get quick results.
Hmm.
For like
Yeah.
they are long-term things. Often you have to wait till you're 80 until you're really happy that you had this community.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
I mean, and there's no
but I
end.
argue it's worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. And sorry to interrupt, keep going, but I just couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Yeah. So you never interrupt, Corey or Courtney. So back to social media, because I think this is an important point. So social media is still in its infancy as
Right.
a thing. And as a result, researchers are very hesitant to give it like a green card, yellow card, or red card. So
Hmm.
it's a mixed bag. What is becoming increasingly clear is that if you use social media is what researchers call a way station to meet people and then take those relationships offline, it is a very positive thing. I met you and your husband, Zach, through the internet.
Right.
I probably went to your Instagram feed to be like, who are these people? What is their gym? What does Courtney write about? And then took it offline. And now here we are, close friends. You're interviewing me. And this is happening online. So it's not all bad. The problem becomes when social media becomes an end in and of itself, or when the internet becomes an end in and of itself, and it replaces the real thing. And it's a vicious cycle, because the more time people spend on the internet, the less confidence they have out in the world.
Right.
Other area where social media is an enormously harmful thing is what I would call like airbrush culture. So everybody is
Yes.
portraying this perfect life, and it is literally through a filter, not even a
Mhm.
metaphorical filter. On many of the apps, I think on all of them now, you can go in and you can like brighten up the picture. I mean, God knows what you can do. And that is very problematic because you're setting up a slot machine based on your self-worth. You tweet something,
Right.
you post a picture to Instagram, you post to Facebook, you're pulling down the wheel, and then the jackpot is retweets, likes, comments, what have you.
Hmm.
Um, Very, very different than the true work of building meaningful relationships and community.
Yes. And I want to remember, I have something, a thought based on that. But I want to remember to come back to this, the concept of there being, uh, or the relationship between social media, technology, and cognitive dissonance between who you are and how you project yourself. I'll
Yeah,
come back to that.
yeah.
But so the other the other thing that I think community is so important for, in addition to those elements, like if you just imagine a partner, partners that like such as yourself that have a child, and having your family to help, to be of assistance, whether it's like asking for advice or anything like that, is so important. There's so much that a partnership, so much within a partnership that requires help from the outside, even the partnership itself.
Mhm.
You need a community for. Um,
And I think we're seeing that, to interject real quick. I
yeah.
think COVID is like making that really clear to lots of
Yes.
people. And hopefully it will provide a little bit of a reset in terms of post COVID, perhaps prioritizing building community more, because when it was completely taken away in many cases,
Hmm.
I think a lot of people are hurting as a result.
Yes. Yeah. Totally. And I think so. Part of it as well is our understanding of who we are. So the first principle, accept where you are. I think part of that is accepting who you are, but that's really hard to do if you're only reflecting on yourself. Like there's a reason why we still don't understand cognition. It's because we're using cognition to think about it, and that's really difficult. And similarly, understanding yourself without interactions with others to reflect you back to you is really hard. It's like trying to learn how to do an Olympic lift without at least one video of yourself doing it. You have no idea if it's right or wrong, or you know all of this. And so I think that's the other piece of community is, and of course there's community that's helpful, and then there's maybe people that aren't so helpful and aren't a great fit for you because they're actually not reflecting you accurately back to yourself, in whatever direction. But real, like good, these deep relationships that you're talking about, that helps so much with identity and knowledge that you can use to accept where you are, to get where to take your next step, um, and to see yourself through the fog of self-criticism,
Mhm.
which I think is really important too. So um, yeah, so I did, and I guess this kind of segues. I did want to talk about this cognitive dissonance in today's world, and this there's this notion that like who you are is a brand in today's world. Like you are a brand. We all have these sort of public personas online, and most of us also have personas that we kind of use. We bring them out of the Rolodex and like present them at work or present them to friends or whatever. Um, I would love to hear from you about the relationship between those kind of projections of self and yourself, and how those things impact groundedness.
So the work of the sociologist Irving Goffman is a central part in the book here. And he delineated what he called your backstage self, which is
Hmm.
who you really are, and your front stage self, which is the self that you portray out in the world. And the larger the gap between the backstage self and the front stage self, the more cognitive dissonance or distress, psychological distress that someone feels.
Mm-hmm.
So a practice that I like to use quite often with my coaching clients, myself as well, is if you're in a situation where you're feeling imposter syndrome or some other sort of psychological distress, and the immediate notion is to repress it or to start performing, instead ask yourself, what do I really want to say in this moment?
Mm-hmm.
And then try to say that or something as close to that as possible. So a story that I tell in the book there is around a woman that I've worked with for years in my coaching practice, and Donna is not her real name. I call her Donna. And she had just been promoted to the C-suite of this mega international company. And at the time, she's the only woman in the C-suite and the only person of color in the C-suite. And she is feeling such massive imposter syndrome. And particularly when she's asked to give big talks in front of large audiences. And she starts performing. And when she performs, like all of us, she gets like anxious, she contracts. So I said, Donna, like, what if you could just say what you really wanted to say? What would you say? She said, well, what I'd say is like, I'm totally overwhelmed. I feel like I'm an accidental executive. I don't know how I got here. And I said, well, why don't you say that? She's like, well, what are they? They're going to lose their confidence in me. Then I said, well, might you like then ask them for their help in asking good questions and giving feedback and kind of helping on this journey? So she didn't say exactly that because she had good reason, but ultimately she ended up starting to open up her talks with saying that she feels like an accidental executive. It's a whirlwind. She's often overwhelmed. And that's why I need to work with all of you to steer this company in the right direction. And her self-report of how she felt on stage was significantly better. And the feedback on her talks was significantly better because she wasn't performing and people weren't seeing someone that was like a corporate leader that really tried to perform, but seeing a real person, that of course you feel imposter syndrome. There's a beautiful linkage with imposter syndrome and humility. And we often think of imposter syndrome as just a bad thing, but anyone who truly thinks that they've got it all figured out is generally someone that you want to run the opposite direction from. So if you're not feeling a little bit of imposter syndrome, that to me is more of a problem than if you are.
That's a really good point. And it does kind of make me think about how a lot of the kind of the mixture that went into heroic individualism, when you look at those, like some of the underlying things that drove those qualities, you can see some elements of like things that could have been beneficial either at one point in human evolution or like in small doses now. And something I think about is in your chapter on presence,
Mm-hmm.
not, I think a lot of us have been either thinking about or talking about the impact of screens and instant notifications and like the barrage of information and the impact of that on our attention and our ability to stay present and in the moment. But what I loved in the book is that you also brought up some writings from ancient, Stoics who are talking about how, even in ancient times, people are just running around being like
Yeah.
idly busy, I think is the term.
Yeah, idle busyness, exactly.
Idle busyness, yeah. And so this has been a problem. It's not that this is new for humans. It might be like really amplified these days, but to me, that's almost like I see it as a derivation of our ability to abstract. We can. It's really cool that we can think about the future and think about the past and think about being in another space or even create a whole like different world, like create a story, which is really cool. But when you're always doing that and you're never where your body is, that's when things can really get dicey. And um, I think that, well, I wanted to hear your thoughts on this, understanding or how can readers really take a or a compassionate lens towards things that they struggle with, knowing that there might be like, it might come from something that had been beneficial.
So the first thing that I'd say there is that all of these things are just a part of human nature. So they are on repeat over history. I argue that they're intensified now because we have these technologies that really kind of play to these natural inclinations that aren't always so good for us. But these things are as old as time. So in terms of presence, I like to separate it into two buckets. The first is external distractions. So this is your email, your cell phone, you're wanting to check CNN.com, God forbid, like whatever it might be. And then the second are internal distractions, which I think is what you were alluding to, which is thinking about the future or the past, feeling about the future or the past.
Mm-hmm.
They're both very challenging to deal with. External distractions, in the book I talk about peanut M&Ms and brown rice. So if you've got a bowl of peanut M&Ms and a bowl of brown rice sitting in front of you, and you're like me, you're going to start eating the peanut M&Ms. And the peanut M&Ms always taste better on the first bite, probably even for the first half hour. But after an hour or a day or a week or a year of eating M&Ms, you start to feel sick. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you eat brown rice for a day, a week, a year, you feel a lot better. And so many of the big meaningful activities in our life are like brown rice.
Yeah.
And you have all these little peanut M&Ms, refreshing the internet, posting on social media. Porn is such a huge problem for younger people because it's just a peanut M&M, feels good in the moment, versus again, brown rice, which is like actually connecting with someone, working on a creative project, setting aside an hour and a half to just do deep work on something that you care about. That's the stuff that actually nourishes you, but it's a lot harder to get going on. Mm-hmm. So there, I think the self-compassionate thing to do is not try to be self-disciplined at all. Like, don't rely on your willpower. I don't, you're going to lose. So try to get upstream of that and say, hey, I'm a human brain. Like, I've evolved to crave novelty and stimulation. I'm in an environment that has novelty and stimulation everywhere. So my best chance is to try to get upstream of the behavior itself and to rig my environment. And you see this in Ulysses in the Odyssey, with Ulysses being tied to the mast when they're going by the Sirens' Island because he couldn't rely on his willpower not to go join the Sirens. And we're surrounded by sirens everywhere. So I don't like when people are like, oh, I can't focus. It's like, of course you can't focus. You live in the 21st century in America. Mm-hmm. So I think it's about realizing that, cutting yourself some slack, and then trying to get upstream, and to the extent that you can, designing your environment in a way that removes those distractions.
Yeah, I love that.
That's the external part. And I'll say one more thing, because this often catches people off guard. You often feel worse before you feel better doing this. Because the stimulation of a novelty is kind of like an addiction. So the first 15 minutes of trying to do really deep work, and I know we've got readers here, but some people that have gotten like so caught up in frenetic energy that they haven't been reading. And I've had this happen to me. I'm embarrassed to admit, just reading a book and focusing on a book for 30 minutes, it can feel so hard. And there is an initial like 3 to 4 week learning phase where your brain kind of has to relearn what it's like to do deep work and really focus, or have a conversation with your cell phone, not even in the same room as you. Because initially you're kind of looking for it, you're checking, you're wondering what could be happening, and that takes some time.
Oh,
go ahead, Courtney. Go.
I was just going to say, no, on this point, I'm so glad you said that, because I had this experience earlier on and I thought I was crazy, but now I'm going to say it because I don't think it's crazy. I think I told you this. I totally got rid of every social media account. So I was like social media free, and I was very excited about it because at baseline, I know it stresses me out. I don't like it that much. And I knew it was contributing to a lack of presence. And I could feel that my attention span just wasn't where it was pre-social media. So I got off of it, and I had this weird week. The first week I wasn't on social media, that legitimately felt like a tiny baby withdrawal. I felt kind of like in a daze almost. I felt kind of weird. I definitely like a little lethargic and this kind of thing. And I was sleeping fine and doing everything else normally. So I think that can just show how powerful these these things are. They really tap into kind of like basic drives that we have,
Yeah.
and just our neurobiology, and so it can be a lot like, being addicted.
Yeah. And I'm going to feel all of this in about a week, because launching a book in the middle of a pandemic, you spend a lot of time on the internet,
Right.
because like I want to be able to write the next book. So people have to buy the book. And where do you go to find readers in a pandemic? On the internet. Social media is a big part of that.
Right.
So I've had this happen with my other books. It's like coming out of a bender, because for about a week, I'm just like in the internet world. And then you come out of it and I do not feel good. And
Yeah.
just knowing that, and again, cutting myself some slack, being like, hey, like I have to do this once every few years. But now I know, like, after a week, it's time to really ratchet things back, and I'm not going to expect it to feel great. Your second point about internal distraction.
Yes.
So here, there's a real nice overlap between the ancient wisdom traditions, especially in the East, and modern cognitive behavioral science. So in all of the gold standard evidence-based therapies for depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, an enormous element of getting out of cycles of intrusive thoughts and feelings is not to engage with them at all,
Mm-hmm.
which is very different than repressing them or trying not to think them. And also very different than trying to figure out what they mean and why you're having them. It is just noting them. So, thinking is happening, back to what I'm doing. Feeling is happening, back to what I'm doing. And there are literally thousands of studies that show that this practice of non-identification or non-fusion with thoughts and feelings can really help, even at clinical extremes. And that is the core of most contemplative or meditative wisdom traditions, which is you sit, you have some kind of anchor, thoughts come up, you notice the thoughts, they go away, you label them, you note them. It's called noting in many of these ancient wisdom traditions. And ultimately what you're doing is you're creating space between the thought or feeling and yourself. So before
Right.
you learn this practice, you are just fused. You are your thoughts, you are your feelings. By noting, you start to be able to say, oh, there's thinking happening. There's feeling happening. Oh, I can watch this thought rise and flow. I can watch this feeling of despair really like wash over me like a wave. And it's not to say that you should never explore why you're having certain feelings, because often that exploration helps you fix them. But in the moment, when you're really dealing with a tough thought or feeling, or just like a petty distraction, repressing only makes it stronger.
Mm-hmm.
So, I shouldn't think this, bad advice. The whole like think positive is utter bullshit, because like the worst way to be happy is to constantly ask yourself, like, am I happy now?
Yeah.
And wrestling with those things, it's like a Chinese finger trap. You get stuck in there. So the best thing to do is just to walk off the battlefield altogether. And the way that one does this is by learning this technique that again is called noting, which is just to label thoughts, label feelings as thinking, feeling, and then back to what you're doing. I am by no means a pro at this. I have moments where I can do this, and those moments are incredible. It is an ongoing practice for me, and very few people like are enlightened. But I do think this is it's been one of the most beneficial practices in my own life.
Yeah, I definitely feel that way too. I'm not perfect at it by any means. I wouldn't even say good, but it definitely it completely shifts the way that you exist with your thoughts. Because it's more like existing with them instead of being constantly in them.
Yes.
Um, So, yeah, and I think that there's like I just love the balance that you're striking. I'm trying to get out of this ray of the sunset here. um, but I love the balance that you're striking with your text, and that you don't run away from, which is something that I love so much. This the fact that groundedness in part is being who you are actively in real time, accepting that, being present, being that person as much as possible, just as you said, saying what you want to say as much as possible, being who you are as much as possible, keeping those projections of who you are as close to who you are as you can, yet not fusing who you are too closely with what you're accepting, um, or like the experiences that are going on within your body. And I think that nuance is so critical, and it's so hard to conceptualize. And often I think I've encountered writing where um, authors kind of like they just talk about one side or the other, but you bring in both, and I think that's really important. So I wanted to ask you more about this, the importance of a consolidated self, a unified self, but not a self that's fused with experience all the time.
Yeah. So I think you're getting to like the non-dual or the paradoxical nature of this. And I'm really glad that you're wrestling with it, because it's a really like meaty idea to wrestle with. So I think that the kind of deeper self or the unified self tends to emerge over time.
Mm-hmm.
And the experiencing self is what's happening in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
If you look to studies of the extreme, in the case of something like depression, that's what makes depression so hard, is what's happening in the moment. Your brain tells you this is forever, this is who you are. Non-extreme, we can still get caught in those patterns of, oh, this experience is me, or this is forever. And that's where creating that space allows you to maybe in a more discerning way ask yourself, like, is this really who I am, or is this just an experience? The Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh talks about when it rains. No one ever says when it rains that I'm rain. They say it's raining, or I'm being rained on. How is that any different than I'm experiencing distraction? I'm experiencing loneliness, instead of I'm lonely or I'm distracted.
Right.
So the more that we can do to create space between thoughts, feelings, and like our awareness of them, the more that we get to choose which of those thoughts and feelings are useful for our identity or our awareness, and which of those that we want to get left behind. We want to leave behind. It's like a very Buddhist way to think about it, is you like take what works and you leave behind what doesn't. But I think it's a pretty good method. And then wisdom, of course, as you get older, is learning like what works and what doesn't, what to take and what to leave behind. Because we're talking about non-dualism, the other really important kind of paradox in the book is there's a lot in the culture that tells you a story that if you aren't like really hungry, or you like basically if you're grounded or you feel like you're good enough, well, then you're not going to do great things. And that's total bullshit. All the research on performance and all the performance science shows that 99.999% of people perform better from a place of already feeling good enough. Because if you don't, and you're trying, when this isn't just sports performance, this could be getting promoted, it could be hitting a bestseller list, whatever it is. If you're doing that from a place of compulsion, where you are so attached to that if you don't do it, then you are a failure, or like you feel like you need it to be whole, well, then that's going to lead to a lot of anxiety. Mm-hmm. You're going to be performing from a place like this. Mm-hmm. And if you don't get it, you're going to get shattered. Whereas if you can start from a place of being grounded, then you're actually just like playing with the house's money in some ways. And most people tend to have their shoulders go down, and they actually tend to perform much better. They're more likely to enter flow states. So I think that that's another really important notion to flip on its head, that groundedness isn't about like not having ambition or not trying to get better, but it's about doing those things from like a place of joy and love and playfulness as much as possible, which paradoxically leads to a better result than doing them like it's all or nothing. Are there exceptions? Of course. Like the people always ask me, well, what about Michael Jordan in the documentary The Last Dance? The first thing I'd say is that Michael Jordan, I've never met him, but he still seems to be quite angry. And I'd rather not be so angry at 55. The second thing is there's a reason for the basketball fans that they make a documentary about Michael Jordan, but not Tim Duncan. who is another 5-time champion that was completely grounded and just loved the game and didn't have to be angry to win. So I think some of that is on the culture that celebrates these stories of people with a chip on their shoulder, whereas most people, certainly my experience coaching, and again, this is backed up in the research, most people perform better from a place of already being truly confident versus feeling like they need to do something in order to then be confident.
Right. Yeah, I love that. And I think the way you put it in the book is play to win rather than play not to lose.
Yes.
Yeah, and honestly, in the case of Michael Jordan, I would argue that he does play to win. He's not out there playing not to lose. And so it fits, to me, that fits within the point that you were making. I have a lot more questions, but we do have some questions coming in from viewers. So I was going to go ahead and ask a couple of those.
Yeah, let's do it. Thank you,
Yeah,
viewers.
yeah. So the first one is, this is a really great question. So throughout your book, can you apply any of these principles, or do you explicitly in your book apply them to the way that organizations function?
Yeah, so there is a section in the book on how organizations can attempt to apply these principles. So the short answer is yes. The long answer is I think that particularly acceptance, presence, and patience are things that organizations could do a lot better with. So acceptance is like not rosy thinking and figuring out ways within an organization to build in people that aren't just going to constantly say yes or tell the boss what he or she wants to hear. So there's definitely some writing on that. Presence is how do you create an organization that is an environment that is not just constant novelty and distraction. And sure, it's not social media, but it's often email. So how can you build an organization that really values time for people to do deep focus, meaningful work? Not only because those people will feel better, but also because the quality of the work that your organization does will improve. And then patience, which goes hand in hand with presence, something I address in the book, both an individual and an organization level, is like eyes bigger than stomach syndrome, which is trying to take on 30 things and being distracted and feeling rushed all the time because you have 30 things instead of trying to do 3 things and doing them really well. And so many organizations fall into this trap. I hope that there aren't kids watching. Initially, I called this like creating a bullshit list, but my editor called it creating like a no list. But I think we could do a lot better at saying no to many things and really prioritizing on the things that we want to give our all to, and then doing those things at 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And one other thing that I want to say, in addition to your answer, is I love throughout the book how after every chapter, you include practices. And those practices are very concrete ways to apply the principles within the book. And then there's another section at the very end that's devoted to kind of providing a sort of playbook for taking these practices, what to expect when you try to apply them, what does it look like to try to apply them, and so I think that's another strength of the book, just in general, whether it's for individuals or organizations, there's concrete practices throughout, which is awesome. So.
Yeah, I think someone that reviewed my second book, The Passion Paradox, basically said like, this is a big swing at like this great topic, but like there's very little concrete in here. And that really stuck with me because the reviewer, they weren't wrong. So with this book, I really want, and it's my nature, I'm like much more intellectual than operational. So in this book, I was really deliberate about like, can every single principle, really can every single concept be applied? And can I, if I can't figure out how to do it, can I find the right experts that can then help readers apply it? Because I didn't just want this to be like a big think book. I wanted it to have a back half, or at least a back third, that was, okay, here are these concepts. Now, as you said, what do I do about it?
Yeah.
So thank you. I'm really glad that you recognize that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I loved it. Um, and so actually, this kind of is a segue into the second question. So, how would you describe your writing process for this book? Um, just in general, but also in relation to the other works that you've produced in the past.
So people often ask me, how long does it take to write a book? And I say like both 10 years and 3 months. So I take a lot of time up front doing just tons of reading and note taking and outlining. And as a result, when I actually sit down to write the book, the manuscript tends to take on the order of 2 to 4 months. So the actual writing of the manuscript, the draft, and just that, it's a draft, but that tends to happen pretty quickly. I think that's because I spend at least 6 months to a year. So maybe there's 2 years just reading and doing research and reporting. Then there's maybe another 6 months outlining the book. And that for me makes writing 80,000 words a lot less scary, because then I'm really just filling in an outline with the best writing that I can, bring to bear that day. And then very, very like in the weeds tactically, when I'm in the midst of working on a manuscript, my brain is always like very focused early in the morning and a little bit more, I don't want to say dreary, but just like the reins are let a little bit loose in the afternoon. So I found it really useful to write in the afternoon because my brain doesn't have the energy to like edit as I go. So it allows me to just write, even if it's crap. And then the next morning I'll edit. So like a really solid writing day for me would probably be 2 90-minute blocks in an afternoon, and then 2 hours of editing what I wrote the afternoon before early the next morning.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I love hearing that too because and I know that we've spoken about this, but it takes a while to kind of figure out what works best for you as a writer. Um, and I love what you said because part of learning what works for you as a writer in your process is understanding how your cognition works and who you are as a person. So that's very cool.
Yeah. And I think realizing too that for me, anyways, any more than like 5 hours of writing work in a day is beyond diminishing returns. It's actually negative because I just start making whatever I'm working on worse. So not like trying to do, these sprints that are massive days. It's for me, and everyone's different, but for me, it's much more like consistently pounding the stone a little bit every day.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really insightful way to talk about it for sure. Um, the last question that I have in here is just about books that we like to read. So I think the Malaprops community is always looking to build their reading lists. So, Brad, I was wondering if, in addition to your book, do you have any recommendations for our viewers on books that have really been profound for you or impactful?
Oh, there's so many. So, and we were talking about this before, and now I'm like rethinking my choices. So my favorite book is a book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It was written, I believe, in '74 by Robert Pirsig. It is part philosophy, that's a tongue twister, part philosophy, part memoir, and part novel. It's just a beautiful book that really I've now read this book like 5 times, but it's also right book, right person, right time. So I first read this book in undergraduate school, and it like turned me into like in my own mind, like, oh, I really like intellect. I had no idea what intellect even meant, but like really thinking about things. The novel Middlemarch by George Eliot is just a phenomenal book on deep community. It's fiction, it's a novel, but I think you can learn more about community from that book than just about any other book. And then, if I had to pick one more, there's a book called Going to Pieces Without Falling Apart by Mark Epstein. And that is another one of my favorite lesser known books.
That's awesome.
What about
What
you?
is okay, so well, I was saying before this that I have just finished reading Their Eyes Were Watching God as an adult, rereading it, because the last time I read it was in high school.
Yeah.
And that book completely hit me differently as an adult woman. And what I've been doing right now is like running around telling everyone I know to go and read that book again, because it just is it's so profound in so many ways, just from the writing style to the concepts that are grappled with to the character development. It's just beautiful. So it's sort of my recommendation is to pick that book up, which you probably read in high school, and read it again as an adult without a test at the end and
Yeah.
just enjoy it. But beyond that, recently I've been also really, um, the Broken Earth series by N.K. Jemisin has, I just, I loved that book too. I mean, I think, or that series, the whole series, it's really challenging to combine amazing world building, awesome character development, just an enthralling narrative, and then also like discussion on concepts that really matter. And N.K. Jemisin just nailed it, all four. It was this like incredible kind of work. And I think it bridges like sci-fi and speculative fiction. Um, and I think it's so important to read um, for everyone today because it grapples with issues we're all grappling with. So that's the other series I'd recommend.
I have two more to sneak in
Yes,
because
do
your high
it.
school thing made me think. See, we could just talk about books all day. That's why
Yeah.
we love Malaprops. Brave New World, a book that I read in high school and like didn't really get, and then reread it 3 years ago, and it's like, holy crap, Aldous Huxley's a genius. And then indirectly related to Brave New World is a terrifying but just phenomenal work of like intellect, which is more recent, and it's called Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff. And she basically connects like some of Huxley's hypotheses in Brave New World to lots of behavioral design that big technology companies use to influence our behaviors. So those are two other great books, one from high school.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I think that now we've kind of gone for an hour, so we should probably wrap up, even though I could keep talking about this forever. So I'm going to bring Patricia back in for some final remarks.
Thank you so much, Courtney,
Yes.
for reading the book early and just for being such a wonderful friend and conversation partner tonight and always.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Thank you for writing this book.
I really don't want to say anything more after that because that was so wonderful. Thank you all for being here. Thank you so much for spending this time with us to discuss Brad Stulberg's latest book. And I'll read the whole title this time, The Practice of Groundedness, a transformative path to success that feeds, not crushes, your soul. And that's a wonderful title. And we thank you so much, Courtney, for being in a wonderful conversation together. Those are great book recommendations. Those were solid. I like that mix. And anybody who's watching, if you had to tune in late, you can always come back and rewatch the video again on our YouTube channel. Congratulations so much to you both. And I'm so glad, Brad, that your latest book is continuing to help us understand more and more about how to live better lives, improve the quality of our lives, and hopefully improve the quality with patience of the communities around us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And listeners, if you missed at the beginning, please, 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 particularly if you live in Asheville, but even if you don't, pick up a copy of the book from Malaprops. If you've already gotten a book from somewhere else, it makes a great Christmas gift, Hanukkah gift. So pick up another copy from Malaprops or walk down to your local bookseller if you're tuning in from elsewhere.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks for joining us.